Hey everyone, and welcome back to NexGen News. I'm Trenton.
And I'm Oscar.
And this is NexGen News. We have a very important show for you today, including learning more about Ramadan and the new Georgia voting law.
Trenton's absolutely right. You do not want to miss this one. Let's jump on in. Hey Trenton, have you heard about Ramadan?
Ramadan?
Yeah, I heard something about it, but I don't know what it is.
Are you talking about Ramadan? The holy month of worship, prayer, fasting, and study of Quran for the Islamic faith? That Ramadan?
Maybe?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Oh, well, can you tell a little bit about it?
Certainly, friend. Like I mentioned, Ramadan is the holiest month for the Islamic faith that over 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet recognize and celebrate.
Over 1.5 billion? Whoa, that's a lot of people.
It sure is. Do you know Islam is the second largest religion on the planet?
I do now. So is Ramadan like Christmas that falls on the same day every year?
Not exactly. Let me explain. Ramadan is celebrated for an entire month, and when it is celebrated varies because Islam is based on the lunar calendar, which, like lunar implies, is based on the cycles of the moon and is about 10 or 11 days shorter than the solar calendar, which we use and is based on how long the Earth takes to complete an orbit around the sun. Ramadan is in the 9th month of the lunar calendar, so its start date pushes back about 10 or 11 days each year. In the year 2030, there will actually be 2 Ramadans in the same solar year.
Whoa, that's pretty cool. So what kind of stuff do they do during Ramadan?
Muslims spend the month in worship, prayer, studying the Quran, which is the Islamic sacred book similar to the Bible for Christianity or the Torah for Judaism, and they fast for the whole month.
You mean they don't eat for the whole month?
No. They fast from dawn until sunset and have special meals like sahur, which is a meal pre-dawn before the day's fast begins. And then, each evening at sunset, they break their fast in a meal called iftar. During the fast, they don't even drink water.
What? Not even water? I don't think I could make it.
Fasting is a very important pillar of the Islamic faith, and Ramadan is the most important time to fast of the year. On the final day of Ramadan, they celebrate Eid al-Fitr, which is the celebration of the breaking of the fast and lasts up to 3 days depending on the country.
Whoa, I had no idea that Ramadan was such an important time for so many people around the world. Thanks, Trenton. I'm excited to ask my Muslim friends the kind of things they're learning during this month.
And you can also wish them a Ramadan Mubarak, which means Happy Ramadan or Blessed Ramadan.
Ramadan Mubarak to all of our Muslim friends out there. Trenton, what are you thinking about?
I just have Georgia on my mind.
Isn't that a song?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, well, okay then. Why do you have Georgia on your mind?
Well, have you heard anything about the new Georgia voting law?
A little bit. I know the MLB All-Star game was moved out of Georgia from Atlanta to Denver because of it.
Yeah, that's true. The MLB is protesting the new law by moving the game, but there's a lot more to it than that.
How much more?
A lot. But don't worry, our friend Giovanna knows all about it. Let's now head to Giovanna for this week's edition of NexGen Politics.
Hey NexGen viewers, Giovanna here for an important edition of NexGen Politics. Trenton, I too have had Georgia on my mind for a while now. It all started back in November 2020 during the presidential election. It was a close race in Georgia, but after counting all the ballots and then counting them again and again due to accusations of election fraud, Democrat Joe Biden carried the state. It was the first time a Democrat had won Georgia and turned the state blue since 1992. Then, in the Senate runoff elections in January 2021, Democrats Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock beat Republican opponents David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, another sign that Georgia is turning blue and more Democratic. But Georgia is not all blue, and its state government is what we call a trifecta. A trifecta occurs when the same political party holds control of the governor's office and both chambers of the state's legislature. Currently in Georgia, the Republicans have a state government trifecta. Republicans control both chambers of the state legislature, and the governor of Georgia is also a Republican. So although Georgia voted Democratic in 2 national elections, the state government is still controlled by Republicans, and the Republican officials in Georgia have been very busy. Following the presidential election and accusations of election fraud, Republicans have been working on legislation which they say will increase voter security in future elections. Law SB 202 was approved by Georgia's Republican-controlled state legislature and signed by Governor Kemp on March 25, 2021. But what does this new voting law say exactly? There's a lot packed in the law, but here are some of the key points. SB 202 states the following. First, there are new stricter ID requirements for absentee ballots, and it's now illegal for election officials to mail out absentee ballot applications to all voters, and voters have less time to request an absentee ballot. Next, there will be less ballot drop-off boxes, limiting the number to 1 box per every 100,000 people. And these drop boxes will not be available 24/7, but instead will be open during normal business hours only. Additionally, mobile voting centers or buses that brought voting to the voter if they did not live near a polling location are essentially banned. And last, it is now illegal to offer food or water to voters standing in line at a polling location. People in favor of the law say the goal is to improve election security, and while making someone show an ID to get a ballot does show heightened voter security, banning people from providing food and water to voters that are waiting in lines does not, especially since Georgia is notorious for long voting lines. In the November 2020 election, in more populated areas such as Atlanta, people reported waiting in line for more than 10 hours. And now it's a misdemeanor to bring these people refreshments while they wait?
What? How can it be illegal to bring people snacks and water?
That's just being neighborly and shouldn't get you arrested.
I totally agree with you. Many critics of the law say this is not about voter security at all, but instead about voter suppression. Voter suppression is a strategy used to influence the outcome of an election by discouraging or preventing certain groups of people from voting. Voter suppression is not new and unfortunately not uncommon. If we go all the way back to 1776, when the Founding Fathers first wrote about a fair and just democracy for all, only white men were allowed to vote. In 1870, after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment granted African American men the right to vote. But Jim Crow laws required literacy tests, proof of property ownership, and poll taxes to vote. This eliminated nearly all African Americans from being able to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed voter suppression and discrimination tactics, and gave black men and women the legal right to vote. Many people thought this marked the end of voter suppression. However, it still exists in society today. In Georgia, some people believe the Republicans behind the new voting law are trying to suppress voters that are more likely to be Democrats or vote for a Democratic candidate. For instance, in the 2020 presidential election in Georgia, of the absentee or mail-in ballots received, 65% of them voted for Democrat Joe Biden, while only 34% of them voted for Republican Donald Trump. By imposing much stricter limits on absentee and mail-in ballots, some people believe this is a purposeful tactic to limit Democrats from voting at all. Additionally, imposing ID requirements will most likely affect voters of color. And according to the Pew Research Center, the number of black registered voters in Georgia increased by 25% in 2020, more than any other racial group. The new ID requirements could prevent some of these voters from being eligible. And finally, limiting the number of drop-off boxes and times people can drop off their absentee ballots makes it more difficult for working people to vote. Put simply, although some parts of Georgia's new voting laws make voting more secure, all parts of the new law make it more difficult for people to vote. Backlash over the new Georgia law has come from many public figures. In addition to the MLB moving the All-Star game from Atlanta, Georgia to Denver, Colorado, actor Will Smith and director Antoine Fuqua have pulled the production of their upcoming $100 million movie Emancipation out of Georgia, giving the following statement. We cannot, in good conscience, provide economic support to a government that enacts regressive voting laws that are designed to restrict voter access. They now plan to shoot the movie in Louisiana instead. Additionally, hundreds of companies across America have signed a letter opposing U.S. voting restrictions, and President Joe Biden has called the new Georgia law an atrocity and said this is Jim Crow in the 21st century. It must end. We have a moral and constitutional obligation to act. Despite these protests, other state governments are on a path to implement similar laws to Georgia's. States such as Texas and Arizona are considering voting bills as well. So what can be done to combat these laws? Well, lawsuits have already been filed challenging the laws on the basis that they disproportionately affect minority voters. But if the laws stand, it'll be up to voters to fight suppression and make sure their voices are heard. For the next major election in 2022, Georgians should be prepared to bring their own snacks and water in line, perhaps a folding chair too, and make a plan to vote early. For all of us who don't live in Georgia or who are under 18 and aren't eligible to vote yet, myself included, it's up to us to stay vigilant of these laws and speak out about how they affect our democracy. I'm Giovanna, and thank you for tuning in to this important edition of NexGen Politics.
Trenton, what's that?
Oh, it's just my inhaler.
Oh my God! What's going on? Are you okay? Do you need a doctor? Somebody call a medic!
Dude, chill out. It's okay. I have asthma, so sometimes I just need my inhaler.
Oh, I didn't know you had asthma.
Yep, it's actually pretty common.
How common?
Well, it seems like it might be time for me to nerd out on some data. Here's 3 fast facts about asthma. Fact number 1, according to the CDC, 1 in 13 people in the US have asthma. That's about 25 million people, and about 6 million of those are children. Speaking of children, fact number 2, African American children experience asthma at higher rates than any other youth ethnic group. And finally, fact number 3, unfortunately, the number of people with asthma has been steadily increasing since the 1980s and is most prevalent in areas connected to poverty, poor air quality, and poor health care.
Wow, that seems pretty unfair. Just because where you live, you may be more likely to have asthma.
Yes, and because asthma is a condition that affects the lungs, people that live in highly polluted areas are more susceptible because the pollution can swell the airways. But some people are working to combat this issue. Meet Carlene Francisco. At the age of 8, she was diagnosed with asthma. Carlene lives in a Filipino immigrant neighborhood in South Stockton, California, which has high levels of air pollution. But Carlene is not the only kid on the block with asthma. Let's hear from her now about her experience.
I grew up in school with everyone having asthma. It was not something rare for everyone. So I was like, oh, I have it. That's I'm like everyone else now. I would tell people, oh yeah, I have asthma. And then my next friend would be like, yeah, I have asthma too. And we all grew up in South Stockton, and we all grew up by the port, and we all grew up by Charterway, which is by the 5 and the 4, and by all these factories that have all these toxic pollutants in the air. It's kind of like a second nature to us.
Carlene has confirmed the pollution in her area by using California's online mapping tool, Cal EnviroScreen, which provides data on environmental pollution to the public. This same mapping tool that helped Carlene realize the disparities in the impact of air pollution is now a model for President Biden and the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan includes billions of dollars to fight air pollution in low-income areas. And the best way to find those areas is for the EPA to upgrade to California's mapping tool. Not only will this tool help Biden target areas of need, but also make environmental pollution data available to the public and help educate everybody about environmental pollution in their area.
It kind of reminds me of that Nelson Mandela quote. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world.
Yes, and in this case, that weapon is the digital mapping tool. If the EPA and everyday citizens are educated about environmental pollution, perhaps they can change the world.
A world without air pollution. What a dream.
A world without air pollution would do wonders for my lungs. As they say, it ain't easy being wheezy. Come on.
Hey Trenton, did you hear the latest buzz?
What buzz?
On New York bee deliveries?
Oh boy, you're really going for it.
It's the bee's knees.
Oscar?
Let me fill you in so you're not behind on this trend that's sweet as honey. Bees have arrived in New York City. Not in the terrifying way, those murder hornets are making headway. These bees are here to help pollinate the city's many urban gardens. Andrew Coate, the president of the New York City's Beekeepers Association and founder of Andrew's Honey, drove the bees from Georgia in 200 wood and screen crates, each containing about 12,000 bees, to deliver these furry little helpers to the city's urban beekeepers. Let's hear from Andrew and some of the happy customers.
In New York City, if one has a beehive, those bees are going to collect their nectar from a variety of different sources, and there's really a plethora of opportunities for them. It's quite a smorgasbord because very few of these trees here in Manhattan are indigenous, so many different flowering, blooming sources of nectar exist for these bees, and so they create this through their special alchemy, this beautiful honey that cannot be found anywhere else in the world.
New York is surprisingly a great habitat for healthy bees. The worldwide bee population is in a sharp decline for a variety of reasons, some being climate change, decreasing crop diversity, the loss of their natural habitat, and chemicals and pesticides used in rural farm areas. In New York, beekeeping was legalized in 2010, and the number of urban beekeepers grew quickly. According to the Department of Health, there are hundreds of registered beehives across the 5 boroughs.
You need pollinators. A third of what you put in your mouth needs a pollinator. So it's important for pollinators to be prevalent in the environment. Having a lot of variety is wonderful for bees. That's what they like. They like a varied diet.
Whoa, I had no idea that bees are so important. It's nice to see the New Yorkers embracing them so lovingly.
Could it be any sweeter?
Wait, do you hear that?
Hear what?
That buzzing.
Are those bees?
I think all your colorful bee puns just attracted them.
I didn't know such flowery bee language would also draw in the bees.
Stop with the bee jokes.
Well, NexGen viewers, I guess it's time we wrap up our show for today.
It sure is. I'm Trenton.
And I'm Oscar.
And we are NexGen News, bringing news to the next generation.
Hey, someone get help. We need a beekeeper here.